Welcome back to Proudly Made in Africa, where we explore the stories, innovations, and voices shaping trade justice and development across the continent. I'm your host, Raj Maverick, and today I'm thrilled to welcome a guest who has really been at the forefront of global value chain reform and responsible business practices. Joining me is Killian Stokes, the CEO of Proudly Made in Africa and a co-founder of Moyee Coffee in the UK and Ireland. Killian is a seasoned social entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience, spanning the tech, education, and non-profit sectors. His work with Moyee Coffee has really helped shape the fair chain model that ensures more value is captured on the producer side in these growing communities. So let's get started. So once again, thanks, Killian, for joining us today on this very important podcast session. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Thank you for having me on, Raji. It's great to
Awesome.
be here.
I wanted to start by saying I've seen your extensive experience from outside, what we've seen online, podcast sessions, and I can see you have over 2 decades of experience in tech, business, entrepreneurship. We're talking about nonprofit sectors and education. But can you just give me an insight of how that whole thing came about, like your journey?
Yeah, sure. I think quickly, I suppose I studied in college business and economics like over 20 years ago, right? And I suppose I was interested in business and I was really interested in economics and I suppose passionate about how our countries work and our, at a macro level, how economies thrive or progress. And maybe in particular, in that time, I studied that in Trinity College here in Dublin. And there was one really good economics course, the economics of less developed countries. And that was a fabulous course. It was really interesting. There was a professor, Alan Matthews, and that inspired me because I got very interested in how Ireland had developed, right? We were a developing country in many ways. And you could see in our economic history the moves we made that brought about progress and prosperity. And so I was interested in countries of the global south, in particular sub-Saharan Africa, and seeing how those economies too, from maybe some simple moves, almost like chess or something, those governments, those people could make some moves and make giant leaps forward. So that course still sticks with me, 20, 30 years on maybe. Um, but when I left college then in the mid 90s, the tech sector was starting to boom, the whole internet age. So I spent about the first, my 20s maybe, working for various tech companies. And again, I was inspired by that was the potential of of technology and mobile phones and communications to advance development. So I suppose I loved the idea that, with the development of the internet, it meant physically, kids in a school halfway up a mountain don't need a load of books there. They just need internet access and they can have the knowledge. So I suppose my involvement in the internet and mobile internet industries was also fueled by an interest in technology helping with human development and prosperity. So then in my 30s, I moved from the tech sector, probably the dot-com bubble in 2002 kind of pushed me out of the tech sector and on into the not-for-profit world. And then I worked for a couple of NGOs like Concern. I went back to college and I studied a master's in international relations part-time. And that's really in my 30s, I was very fortunate to start to travel in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, to visit countries like Uganda and Ethiopia. So I suppose maybe in my 20s, I was with work, I got to travel to the States and European countries, a little bit of Asia. In my 30s, I got more exposure to developing countries, places like Nepal, as well as I say, sub-Saharan Africa, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Burkina Faso. And it was on one of those trips that I had it was Mount Elgon in Uganda, where on a weekend off from the NGO work, I went on a coffee tour. I was hiking, and a local guide there, Steve, brought me on this coffee tour, and that opened my eyes to the world of coffee and maybe the beginnings of that definitely that trip planted a lot of seeds in my brain around coffee and value and how develop and a key element of development, which even relates back to Irish development, about value chains and populations capturing the value of their own resources and their own wealth.
That's beautiful. So I'm assuming that last section was what led you to co-founding Moyee's Coffee. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be?
Yeah, sure. And I was so I suppose my first trip to Uganda was in 2005, but I've gone back a number of times, and I think that trip in Mount Elgon was 2008 or 2009. And I on that coffee tour with Steve. I remember we in the morning time we were it was a place Sippy Falls, Mount Elgon, really beautiful part of the world, and we were hiking up by these gorgeous waterfalls. And along the way up, as we followed the river up, we were seeing meeting the farmers along the route, and we met one family of farmers. There was a father, a husband and wife. That they had a grandfather was there and a couple of kids, and we stopped and talked to them. And the grandfather had a patch over his eye, but they couldn't afford to go to a doctor. You know, he had a sore eye. And the kids I could see were kind of running around playing, but they were skinny and barefoot. And maybe I knew from my work with concern, I kind of knew what, you know, they looked to me malnourished, as in my kind of based on my NGO experience. So I could see that the family was struggling, you know. And but they told me that they had the land that they owned was about the size of two football pitches. They would grow their food on one patch of land, and that fed them for the year. And on the other patch of land, and it was all kind of in the forest, in the jungle there on the mountain. So quite not like a field you'd see here, but it was much more biodiverse. But on the second patch of land is where they would grow their coffee. And they explained to me that they would spend half a day of farming, you know, up early in the morning, half a day working on their food, on the crops, and the other half of the day working on their coffee. And at the end of a year, from the coffee, the food was just to feed themselves. The coffee was what they sold, and they might earn €300 from the whole year, 300, maybe 400 on a good year. And I was kind of flabbergasted at that. How much work, like half a year's work for $300 to half a year of two people, the husband and wife together. And I just thought, you know, there's something wrong here. And on that same hike, like maybe an hour later, we popped out of the jungle. We were back on a Tarmacadam road, and we started to walk back a few miles back into town. And we passed by this washing station, which is where the farmers would bring their crop. They would bring their coffee cherries. They would weigh them, and then sell them. And it was a washing station or a collection station that was sponsored by Irish Aid. So my eye was caught by the Irish logo. So I was like, oh, that's our government. We're paying for this. Our tax, you know, our euros are going here. And I saw on the chalkboard that had the Irish Aid logo, today's price for coffee was there. And that was 30 cents for a kilo of coffee. And I mean, I knew very little about coffee. I mean, I was just a man on the street. You know, I drink a couple of cups of coffee. I didn't know anything beyond that. But I was able to, you know, calculate in my head, okay, if I go to the supermarket here in Dublin, a kilo is, I normally buy a quarter, you know, you and I would buy a quarter kilo. That's the typical size bag you find in an aisle. So four of those, a kilo of coffee in a supermarket would cost you and I here in Ireland 20 to 30 euro. And I now know if it's specialty coffee, which actually the coffee from that mountain was, all of the coffee those people were growing was organic, no fertilizer, high altitude, 100% Arabica, really super beans. And so you could pay 50 euro for a kilo of that. So again, I was there kind of scratching my head going, this is wrong. Why am I working for NGOs? Why am I asking us, the public here, to donate to farmers in Africa? Like, why don't we just pay them a fair wage? 30 cents for 1 kilo. So like the farmer earns less than 1% of what I pay for coffee in a supermarket. And then later I kind of did it a bit further, talking about street value of coffee. I thought, well, hang on, if you go into a coffee shop, you know, a kilo of coffee, you can slice and dice it. A barista can turn that into 100 cups of coffee. So they can sell that for somewhere between 300 and 500 euro. Now, of course, the coffee shop has rent and staff, but it's still mind-boggling. You're going, hang on, almost like the drug trade. You go, and coffee is a drug for many of us. You know, we're addicted to it. We love it. But I'm like, the street value of coffee can be 500 euro, and the farmer is getting 30 cents. That's bananas, how messed up that is. And so, you know, and obviously bearing in mind that coffee, so as that day progressed, we stopped in, we're back in town, closer to town. There was a widows group, and they encouraged us to come in to a cafe that they run. And they kind of roasted coffee, and they showed us the whole process, and they brewed us up some beautiful coffee. And then they sold me, as the tourist, they sold me a kilo of coffee, and I paid them 10 euro for that kilo. So compared to the farmer and these women in town, they were making $10, 10 euro versus 30 cents. So a huge increase, really nice. And those ladies were telling me that the profits they made from their little cafe, they were able to send their daughters to, it was a local widows group. They'd lost their husbands and had to work and stuff. They had been able to send their girls and their boys to school. And even one lady was proudly telling me about her daughter who was down in Kampala studying medicine, I think. So like they were able to cover their family costs, cover the education for the kids, put food on the table, you know, but they didn't have enough tourists. I mean, Uganda gets some tourists, Mount Elgon gets some tourists, but not as many as you'd see in Rome or Paris or, so they wouldn't necessarily have people walking by like me every day. So again, that was like an economics lesson I mean, what I learned from those ladies was making coffee, roasting and processing coffee is not rocket science. And it's not even ice cream. It doesn't need a cold chain. It is, you take that cherry on a tree, you take the stone out of the center, you kind of wash it and shave it and hull it, as we call it, take some skin off it. And you dry it in the sun, you wash it and dry it in the sun for a few days, maybe 2 weeks, and you can roast it. And that afternoon, like I roasted, the tour finished with me roasting coffee in a frying pan in a shed, in a tin shed. I mean, the flavor was a bit smoky, but you got the gist of it. And I brought green beans home and I cooked them in the oven here. I roasted them like I've roasted coffee beans in frying pans and those. So all of that was me learning that bloody hell, coffee is simple. It's not rocket science. Why is it that when you and I go to a supermarket here, all of the brands that we buy are Dutch or German or American or Starbucks, Illy, Lavazza? They're not brands from Brazil or Colombia or from Ethiopia or Kenya. And that to me, again, is like, there's something wrong here. And I learned if you compare it with wine, I think it's fascinating to compare it with wine. The French, we don't make wine here in Dublin or in Kilkenny or Waterford. The French make wine and they sell us their wine with the brand Bordeaux or Champagne. Nobody else can call it champagne. And so they've captured the true value of their product. They've kept it really high level. We pay extra for French wine compared to others. We pay extra for champagne. It's top of the pile. So they're really capturing $1 billion industry for themselves. Maybe here closer to home in Ireland, we grow hops and barley, but we turn it into whiskey and beer. We don't export those products as raw commodity. But what I learned from that trip on Mount Elgon and subsequently reading up about it is that all of the coffee on our planet is grown in and around the equator, and yet 99.99% of the coffee we drink, like all of the coffee you and I drink in the West, is roasted here in the West. And so that means all of the jobs. It means coffee leaves the coffee belt as a commodity, very low price. It generates no local jobs, no technology, no sophisticated roasting jobs or flavor profile, and none of the value of a brand is captured. So you look at companies like Lavazza and Starbucks, multi-million dollar businesses, but the profits, the tens of millions in profit are going to people, shareholders and leadership, and owners in the West, in Seattle, in Berlin, in not in Ethiopia, Brazil, Colombia, Kenya, not in the countries of the coffee belt.
Wow.
So that's, to me, is really mind-boggling. And you're like, why is that the case?
Okay, so I have that question too. Why is that the case? Because I'm also curious about the sustainability of that model, where the likes of Starbucks, they're giants, but if they still rely on getting these raw commodities from these local sectors of Africa and the likes, right? There's the risk of deforestation and unsustainable growth. If they're not able to put value back on that side of the country or the continent, how can they justify that sustainable business development? Or is there a risk of actually, unsustainable business development with this structure? Or are they doing something about it?
Look, I'm not an expert of the ins and outs of Starbucks or Lavazza or any of these big
Mm-hmm.
brands we know, but they talk about doing sustainable projects or ESG. There's a lot of language on their packets. They'll tell you what they're doing. They're planting trees or something. But from that first experience I had on Mount Elgon, I've been traveling back to Mount Elgon with Moyee. over the last 8 years. I've been traveling to Burundi, down in the Burundi forest down in the southwest of Uganda. I've been to Ethiopia multiple times, up into the mountains and seen the forests there, and over to areas around Mount Kenya. And in every coffee growing region I've visited, they have lost 25% of their trees since the year 2000. Mount Elgon, the last time I was in Mount Elgon 2 years ago, the week after I was there was massive floods off the mountain, and the water ran off the mountain, and about 25 people in the local town, Mbale, were killed. And as somebody on the mountain told me, they pointed out to me, there are no more trees on Mount Elgon below 2,000 meters. They've been stripped off. And what one of the farmers told me is the multinationals have been here for 20 years. So the buyers for Starbucks and Lavazza and all that have been in the coffee belt. They've been in Burundi and working with local farmers in Mount Elgon and Mount Kenya. This farmer said to me, the multinationals have been here for 20 years and nothing has changed for farmers. They are still dirt poor. And so the status quo, business as usual, is absolutely broken. And what I observed down in Burundi forest was, it was like probably the worst day I've experienced on any of my coffee tours. I flew in to the wrong airport when I was going down to meet some coffee farmers, and I flew into the wrong airport. So I had to take a truck or a jeep for about 7 or 8 hours, and I drove down along the edge, or we drove down along the edge of Burundi forest. And again, Burundi's lost 25% of its trees in the last 20 years. And what I saw that day was deforestation, mudslides, roads swept away. We encountered a truck that had flipped over the edge because of the erosion. We came through all these forests that were on fire. And what was explained to me was, and we stopped and had a look, was some of the local coffee farmers were going in, they would chop down a giant tree. And they couldn't move it, so they'd burn it right there and then in the forest to generate charcoal as a secondary income for them. And in fact, the truck that we met, the truck that jackknifed and went over the edge, and its contents were spread out over the fields below us, that truck was full of charcoal. And what I learned that day is that if farmers, again, those farmers are earning 300, maybe 400 euro a year from the multinationals. And if those farmers, a living income in the coffee belt, in many of these regions, to feed your family, you need to be earning 1,200 euro a year. So those people I met that day on Mount Elgon, they need 1,200 a year to feed their kids properly, to pay for their education, to pay for the old man to go to the hospital, to have a bit of savings for the future. So these folks need to triple. They need to triple what they get paid. So what I learned in Burundi was, if you are a smallholder farmer, if you're poor and you cannot feed your family, then you actually don't have the luxury of thinking about the environment or the SDGs or sustainability. You are looking at your kitchen table and you cannot look beyond that.
Yeah.
So the farmers I saw that day, there might be a tree in the forest that took 100 years to grow. These farmers will chop it down in a weekend. 2 or 3 guys will chop it down over a weekend. They'll burn it and turn it into charcoal. And that might give them an income for 3 months or 6 months. That might feed their family for half a year. But that took 100 years for that tree to grow. And that's the tragedy. And there was, on that same day, we were passing all of these fields where people were growing tea and coffee. And in amongst the fields, there was these, I thought they looked like headstones. They reminded me of if you drive to the beaches in Normandy, you know all those white headstones of the American soldiers, the graves. It reminded me of that because there was so many of them in a row. And I didn't know what they were. I thought they were rocks, or were they monuments? And we slowed down and I stopped the car to get out and take a look. And it was the stumps of these giant trees. So the farmers had cleared the land to grow more tea, to grow more coffee, and to chop down the trees and burn them and turn them into charcoal as a secondary income. And so their fields, coffee trees or tea, the shrubs that grow tea, they come up to about chest height. These stubs were higher than them, and they were everywhere. And like one field might have 100 stumps, so that's 100 trees knocked down and cleared. So you could see the scars on the land, either where soil erosion had ripped the fields and the soil away, or in the fields where the farmers were working, the remnants of the dinosaurs, the bones of these ancient forests. And to me that day, I just learned so much on that day. I mean, maybe I'm describing here as two particular days in my journey into coffee or something. But that second day, I was like, oh my God, this is really screwed. We are business as normal, multinationals coming in here doing partnerships. It's not good enough. We're so far behind the curve. And if we continue on this route, those poor farmers will continue to chop down the trees. They don't have the luxury of being focused on the environment or being sustainable, not if they're getting paid so little. And so, I mean, I guess it's like what we attempt to do at Moyee, and
Mm.
you're seeing more companies doing it in still small companies, but trying to do it in different industries, is paying everybody fairly. And so I think in the journey of your cup of coffee or my cup of coffee, the Mother Earth needs to get paid. The farmers need to get paid properly for what they give. Mother Earth needs to be paid for the land that she gives up, for the forests, the trees that get chopped down. And that should be the norm in every product that is on our supermarket shelves. Every product in your fridge and in your cupboard at home, Mother Earth needs to be paid for them. And the farmers definitely need to be paid.
And that's validly said. Why I'm so curious is because these large corporations are building, a century-year-old planned business. They're not trying to build a company that would not have a supply in the next 50 years or so. So, even though they have ESG plans, and let's say maybe it's not as efficient yet, my curiosity always goes back to the part where they need to understand that the forecast of their supply chain is diminishing. Obviously, there's something about the African continent where they might not be very open to those large corporations coming to just impact by planting new plants, new trees, and claiming a reforestation plan. But instead, like you mentioned, they need to pay them fairly so they can start to care about their environment by themselves. Because there's this whole ideology that once the Westerners come and start planting, they might claim the land for themselves, and I think that's a phobia they have. But once you give them what they are due, then they would care about it themselves and help.
Yeah, and bear in mind that phobia, it's based on real experience. Like the last couple
Yes.
of hundred years, we've had a lot of exploitation by either multinational companies or colonial powers in the past. So, like, it's not born; it's born from experience.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. But also, this seems like it's just colonial economics, right? So it seems like we haven't gotten away from that whole system still. But like it goes back to that question I asked: do you think these companies are just ignorant about the diminishing, return that they would actually get from these environments, or they do have alternative plans to growing raw crops for coffee in the future?
Look, I think there may be a lack of awareness or some ignorance there. I think today, like, I don't think any of the CEOs of Starbucks or the big companies necessarily want to be destroying the forests of our planet. I don't think the humans, the people who go to work for coffee companies, no matter where they are, whether they're in management or baristas or supplying, in distribution or logistics, I don't think people who love coffee want to know that coffee farming is unsustainable, or want to know that there's children in the supply chains for coffee, want to know that our morning cup of coffee is destroying habitats and impacting bird populations and insects and all of that, and or the habitats of mountain gorillas, threatening those. I don't think anybody wants that. But I think modern capitalism as we have it today, and these supply chains and value chains, and many of these companies, the systems that they're operating in were established 200 years ago or more. And when those systems were originally set up, they were built at a time, they were designed like the business model for coffee was set up a couple of hundred years ago. And it was designed to benefit a few fat cats in London and New York and Washington and maybe Berlin and a couple of capital cities. And it literally did not take any account of the farmers in the global south. And there was probably baked in there some racism, some colonialism back in those days. It was the 1800s, 1700s. So, and it was also at a time where the planet only had a billion or less than a billion people living on it, not 8 billion as we have today.
Yeah.
And a lot of the natural places seemed endless. The forests and the habitats seemed to go on forever. So they were designed at a time of plenty. They weren't future proofed, as we know now, but that's when they were designed. So if we are currently, if those companies like Starbucks and others are operating with an outdated business model, then it's not going to work. We have to fix it. And look, it's not about like companies have to make a profit. If people are investing their money and taking a risk, they have to make a profit in order to pay salaries, to keep the lights on, to be able to invest in the future and protect themselves against future shocks. But farmers have to make a profit too. They need to be able to feed themselves and their families and protect themselves against future shocks. And the environment needs to be paid in there. So I think the maybe the short-term view that we take on profit needs to be changed, and certainly how we calculate costs and how we calculate price of what we as consumers pay, what companies pay, that has to factor in the environmental price and the human price of that's impacted on farming families and their communities. There's definitely an updated accounting model that needs to take place.
And I've heard something similar happening in the tea industry, although maybe the challenges might be, quite extensive or different. But one thing I found out was the power relies on the people, the consumers. If we start to demand this accountability and transparency from the companies really selling those products, then they have to really, take more actions. Or at least maybe there are regulations that need to be enforced in terms of saying, oh, once corporations are exporting or importing products from Africa, there needs to be certain percentage captured back on their side. But I'm curious about how Moyee is doing this currently, because I read that Moyee is able to utilize blockchain to ensure fairness and transparency. How does that work?
Sure. So I think at Moy we're trying to do lots of things at once. We're roasting at Origin. We talk about our journey having an economic impact, a social impact, and an environmental impact. We roast at Origin, so Moyee Coffee is roasted in Kenya and in Ethiopia, so that more roasting jobs and value stays there. We work with farmers in East Africa, in Kenya and Uganda and Ethiopia, probably 7 or 8 thousand farmers at this stage. Um, and with those farmers, we pay them 20% above market rate, and we collaborate with them with farmer training to promote sustainable agricultural practices like pruning and natural organic composting. And we encourage them to take the chemicals out of their farming, and that's kind of linked in with the bonus. And we try to get those farmers to use other crops. Really, we're looking at that. How do we triple their take-home pay? So what else can we do to help them get there? We have tried with blockchain. We talk about this phrase radical transparency. And I think that's something lots and lots of our companies and in this internet age, mobile internet, data, everybody on our planet at this stage has a mobile phone. So one can envisage that it's possible to create a system where the coffee, when it starts its journey on the side of a mountain in Ethiopia, that the price the farmer gets paid is recorded. And then as it goes down, journeys down, you capture the price of the roaster and the truck driver. And so that when you're in a supermarket, you can actually see the full trail that the full journey. That's where blockchain technology comes in. The challenge with it is, it's a technology and it is parts of that value chain are obviously offline. If you're on the side of a mountain, is there internet access? Do the folks you have there, have they the right technical skills to input the data? Or do you have barcode technology, on pallets or sacks that you're able to record? And what you have to make sure is if you're washing and storing coffee, you've got to really label the bags that the coffee stays in the right sequence so that you don't mess up the data. So, I mean, like many computer programs, you talk about garbage in, garbage out. It's really important that the data stays in and the goods or the packets, whether that's pallets or bags or boxes of coffee, that they all follow in a similar sequence. And that gets complicated if you start to create blends of coffee where you bring beans from 3 or 4 different countries. But blockchain is a form of technology. We've been working on it for a couple of years. We've done some interesting trials, particularly in the Netherlands. But I think that is a long-term project that, I mean, look, it's happening in so many foods. There's companies like provenance.org, I think, who are building technologies, and with Moyee, it's the partner, the Fair Chain Foundation is trying to build these digital technologies that can absolutely capture the data and, you know, be a lie detector nearly. So that,
Yeah.
I guess this can be, this is where you want to get to a world where you and I go into a supermarket and any product we pick up, we can check its provenance and really have faith in, okay, this is sustainable. It's not just what they're saying on the packet. I'm seeing the numbers, you know, ring true when I look at their supply chain.
Yeah.
So there will emerge, I'm not sure whether it'll come from Moyee or elsewhere, but there will emerge these international systems of transparency and provenance that we as consumers can rely on. And from them, that will help us make the right choices. You know, I think that's going to be interesting. The role of technology definitely really is going to be key. But who, I also think it's a big technology piece. There's companies like Enveritas.org. It's a coffee foundation, and they use a mix of satellite data and kind of data from handheld devices. People walk in the lands of the coffee belt, and I think they reckon they've mapped 40% of the coffee belt. And one of their calculations, we always thought an industry norm was that there's 25 million coffee farmers on our planet. In Veritas now believe the number is actually 15 million coffee farmers plus their families. It's still around 75 million people relying on coffee for their livelihood, um, which is like 1 in 70 or 1 in 80 people on our planet. You know, it's still a big
Yeah.
chunk of people, but yeah, I think technology is going to play a real role in helping us redistribute wealth more fairly for the planet and for the farmers and workers.
So even though we do understand that it will really help in scaling that aspect for us, so we're talking about accountability because we see it with charity foundations where GoFundMe, donate, and we people want to see how much has been donated so far. Are they actually doing what they claim they will do with this money? So it's important, and I do believe technology would help that. I wanted to bring something I noticed with the CEO of Kahawa Coffee. So she's a lady. The coffee is made in Kenya, I believe, Nairobi. So she did mention that they have these barcodes on the packs of each one they sell in US and stuff, and that barcode captures like a 1% or $1 back to the producer. So because one thing I do understand, technologies like blockchain, even though they are very decentralized, very transparent and accountable, people tend to go for the path of least resistance. So the technology boundary right now in Africa might be very hard for most people to even try to onboard on that. But if there is a medium or a company that really plays that part in the middle, helping the producer and the supplier, make that whole process simpler, I do believe that, yeah, this technology aspect would really help scale the impact of this plan.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think people want the path of least resistance, right? I think consumers, there was a coffee report that Proudly Made in Africa produced, and they had a really interesting finding. It said consumers, and I hope I can get these all right. There's four things consumers want. They want quality coffee, they want sustainability, they want certification, and they want convenience. So convenience is the pods and it's takeaway cups in your coffee. To be convenient, to be really convenient, there's a price going to be paid by the environment. To have sustainability does mean real projects out there, right? To have the certification of Rainforest Alliance or Fair Trade or Fair Chain or somebody like that or B Corp, it's because the consumer wants to know that this is true. That's not it's not greenwashing. They want to be able to trust it. And but then the quality aspects, if we want specialty beans and we want flavors that take coffee from Guatemala and mix it with Kenya, there's a price to be paid by the environment. So those four things that the consumer wants, they are almost like two competing aspects. The other thing is we've learned at Moyee that kind of the phrase we use is all things being equal, that consumers want the coffee to be ethical and sustainable, but they want the quality to be as good as they're getting from whoever's out there, their current supplier, and they want the price to be the same. Even though in surveys, we as consumers will say, oh yeah, I'll pay extra for an ethical product. We don't. At the end of the day, you know, money's tight. You're in the supermarket, you're in the cafe, you're not going to pay, extra euros for the ethical product, you know. And the other thing is with the cacao, she's brilliant. Like, she's such an amazing entrepreneur, and her Shark Tank interview is fabulous.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, as I understand it, there's a mechanism there where the consumer who buys her coffee can take out their phone and donate separately to the farmers. And we've looked at that in Moyee with some of our vouchers, and I don't agree with that at all. As you said, the path of least resistance. What I want to do as a consumer is pick up a brand and know that this company is dedicated to protecting the planet and doing right by farmers. And I want them to do the hard work, and I want me to pay for it, and
Yeah.
me to go home and make my cup of coffee. I don't want me to have to. I mean, could you imagine if you took out your groceries every week and everybody was saying, oh, yeah, there's a QR? You'd have to do 100 QR codes on your cornflakes, on your porridge, on your tea, your coffee, your bag of apples. I don't have the time to do that. Neither do any of the consumers. So the business companies, it's the same way when I go into Tesco and they say, don't forget to take a blue token, that somehow I have to donate to the charity. No, I'm spending my money with you every week. I'm giving you my groceries. I'm paying for my groceries with you. Go use the money. Take 10% of your profits, or 5%, or whatever your percentage is, and go find and support local charity projects here in my area and tell me about it. Don't make me put a blue token into a tube, you know?
If government wants to make this forcible, they can, right? Because how does VAT work? Like, companies do have to pay their VAT. How does that work? Because it seems to be is like a very efficient system.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, you're right. Companies pay tax, and in well-off countries, that tax gets converted into paying for roads or schools or supporting the community. You're right. So that is, I mean, that is, tax is one thing, but we
Hmm.
know that governments, for whatever reason, governments everywhere are not perfect. They are not solving, even here in Ireland, the government is not solving all of our social problems.
True.
Our local sports clubs, our local schools, our local libraries still could do with extra funding to buy materials and books, and give the kids what's needed, or give their beneficiaries what's needed. There's still charities here in Ireland, right?
Yeah.
So our tax alone is not solving homelessness or whatever issue we want to look at. And it's certainly not solving in Ireland the environmental problems behind our potatoes, or our milk, or our Irish farming.
Yeah.
So the companies, certainly the supermarkets, have a bigger role to play. There's a great report from Oxfam called Ripe for Change. I mean, you
Yeah.
should definitely try and talk to some of the guys there.
Yeah.
That is, there's about 8 billion of us on the planet, 8 billion eaters or consumers. And there's something like 600 companies that control the global supply chains of the everyday foods and goods we consume. The clothes we wear, all of the food we eat, the supermarkets we go to. And those companies, like we talked earlier on, their business model was decided a couple of 100 years ago. It's all about extraction and maximization of profit. And it's not about paying the true cost, the full price of the production of those foods and those goods. And that needs to change, globally.
Yeah.
The consumer does have a role to play, but I think government and legislation has a much quicker and stronger and more powerful role. And, those companies, if you got to send a letter to 600 CEOs, if you got to convince them to change their mind, even 100 of them, if you convinced 100 of those CEOs to change their mind, if you hypnotized them and made them all, more sustainable overnight, that would be much more radical than you and I trying to convince. I mean, in Europe, 500 million people, how many different languages? In
Yeah.
Africa, a billion consumers, how many different languages? Forget it.
Yeah.
600 or even 100 CEOs, if we can, sit down with those folks and convince them to shift their companies in a certain direction towards sustainability and long-term growth.
That would make a big change. But that comes back to the part where, like, so for example, the tax aspect, yes, there's inefficiency in how they use the funds, but there's very good efficiency in how they get it. So most companies pay and adhere to that. So my argument is they don't have the excuse of saying we don't have a solution to paying these producers. We don't have a good idea of how to capture the cost properly. So it's basically a thing where For example, I'm pretty sure maybe the power the corporations have over the government is what is preventing them from even enforcing or passing such regulations to start with, because they could enforce some such things if there are arguments from activist organizations and the likes. But it comes back down to the root of it, education. Because you mentioned something, you said it's not like the CEOs of these companies are looking to just exploit and devalue those continent, the continent of Africa or Uganda and Kenya where they're producing these things. They're not trying to deforest the places. They just lack the full awareness of it. So, as a lecturer in business and global development yourself, I'm curious how you think the education can better prepare the next generation or even those entrepreneurs. We're talking about convincing 100 CEOs. They have the education. I do see, like, is it the education currently for businesses is not focused on that aspect of sustainability at all? And is there a need for such to be included within the education system itself?
I definitely think it needs to be in education. And, the work we're doing at Proudly Made in Africa, we're trying to do that. We're trying to bring in case studies of responsible trade in and with Africa, to bring in stories of African entrepreneurs, to bring in the voices of African scholars into Irish business schools. I do think that at the heart of it, you have to care about, responsible is also about caring. And we wouldn't do this to farmers here in Ireland because we see them as our people. So why is it that we let farmers in Africa or in Asia to be treated so poorly, to have children in their supply chains? Because if they're not my kids, doesn't matter. We've got to get over this concept of us and them. And this is where, like, global citizenship education, we've got to come to create a world or change our mindsets so that we see people on the other side of the world the same way we see our cousins and our children and our brothers and sisters here. And maybe that sounds a little bit hippie, but that is, we've got to treat human beings everywhere as we would our own. I always think of the example of, I don't know who it was talked about it, but they said, like, when you see those people dying in the boats in the Mediterranean, that, you read a headline like another 50 people died in a boat off the coast of England, and the French guards didn't pick them up and save them, and the English didn't pick them up, even though they all got the distress signal. If the people in those boats were the family of the prime minister, like when Boris Johnson was prime minister, if the people in the channel were his cousins, he would have moved mountains. He would have used every ounce of power he has. He would have made phone calls to the relevant, if they were in a boat in the Mediterranean, he would have rang the Italian prime minister, the Greek prime minister, the Spanish prime minister. He would have moved mountains to save those people. And you can understand it. That's what you do for your family, but we don't do it for strangers. So we need to start to put personalities and personify and humanize the people behind our everyday products. And we live in a time of international trade. International travel is so much more affordable. International communication, like if we look at our contacts on social media, our Facebook friends and Instagram friends, followers and friends, they are global. So it's very possible for us to connect digitally with people in the factories, in the fields, in the places where our products come from, and to have a better awareness of how life is for them. One of the things we do at Proudly Made in Africa, which my colleague David has been doing, which I think is great, is he gets the students here in Ireland, he connects them with businesses in Africa, coffee businesses and avocado and fruit and veg and tea, whatever, mostly food businesses. But he gets the students here to do projects. They meet the producers and the entrepreneurs online first. They Zoom in with these folks in Kenya and Ethiopia and stuff, and then they go back. They go away, they get some information off them. They go and do some work, and then a few weeks later, they come back and they present that maybe a business model canvas or a pestle analysis or some sort of analysis back to the corporations, back to the entrepreneurs in Africa. And I think that's a great way in education to connect students here in Ireland with the real, get them thinking about and working on the real situations halfway across the world. I think that type of collaboration is brilliant. Like, I remember visiting a midwife school in Uganda. 700 midwives go to this amazing college up on a hill down in the Rakai district. And I mean, the stuff they're dealing with as midwives in Uganda is much more edgier, I would say. They've less resources and things than, say, midwives might be dealing with here in Ireland. We've, healthcare here is much more advanced and there's more resources. But I often thought they had, with COVID, they had Zoom and they have broadband and all that. And I really wanted to connect that college with, say, the College of Midwifery here in UCD or one of the universities, because I thought, wouldn't it be great if they crossed over, if the students online on Zoom learnt what being a midwife is like in Ireland versus Uganda? Wouldn't it be really good to share, cross-pollinate and share experiences from the two different countries? I think more of that. We just have to, maybe that sounds all hippie. We do need to get to a place where we respect people of all creeds and backgrounds and cultures, and doesn't matter where the farmer behind my food comes from. If he or she is in County Mayo here in Ireland or in a mountain in Kenya, they deserve the same human rights. They deserve the same uh, respect and a living wage
Yeah.
for a day's work.
It's good to see, like, at least we need to be able to put yourself in their shoes, or at least recognize the work that they put in into making that process a success. So it seems like what PMI is doing is really substantial, because from my understanding of what I've seen with businesses, especially, it's profit, 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 But with the education part I'm seeing from PMIA, there is this infusion of global citizenship purpose, with profits, because you're a CEO, you have to reward stakeholders and companies. But that purpose needs to come from a global citizenship perspective. You're trying to empower everybody on the supply chain. That's beautiful.
What's really nice about it is I do think the students today are much more switched on. They get it. They are thinking that way. They are studying business and they do want to have successful careers in business, be entrepreneurs, be business leaders. But they also want the companies they work for to make a difference. They also want the work that they do to be adding value to the world at large. Certainly the students I'm meeting, it gives me a lot of hope. I think the younger generation gets it in a
Yeah.
way. The older generation is starting to change, but it has a lot of blocks in the way of getting there.
Now I'm curious, maybe it comes from the history of where we started, because the older generation didn't grow up with technology. So they didn't grow up in this connected network, where they really feel tied into their own community of this is us and that is them. You know, uh,
Knowledge is power, you know what I mean? And the digital world gives us knowledge and makes the world smaller. All of those cliches ring true. It gives us knowledge and awareness of what's happening in our name on the other side of the planet. But
yeah.
it needs to be fixed, though. It is a crisis. I mean, it's great we can talk about how connected we can be, but the urgency is there. I mean, the environment is being, I often think of this when my dad's 90. When he was born, almost 75% of this planet was wild and
Mm.
was natural habitats. And like now in his final years, in those 90 years, we have human progress has been incredible. We've grown from 1 or 2 billion people when he was born to about 8 billion on the planet. But the design, now only 33% or 34% of our planet is wild. So the last 75 years or 90 years of my dad's life has seen a massive improvement for human beings and a massive decline of the environment and of our natural places. And we've got to reverse that or halt that destruction super fast.
Would you also look at the innovation of AI, for example? It's also another layer of technology. Is this beneficial to this industry, this sector, or do you think it's a detriment? Because, for instance, we've seen it already happening in some Western countries where it's just full on mechanization of the production. Even the growth process of things like coffee could happen where they don't need the farmer, you just need the land, and it will be fully mechanized. So, how do you see that really impacting this whole industry as well?
Yeah, look, we've seen farming jobs decline here in the West. I mean, in our Western economies, maybe 1 to 2% of workers are involved in agriculture. If you go to some developing countries, some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, you could have 80% of the workforce is agricultural. I mean, in Ethiopia, 1 in 4 Ethiopians works in the coffee
Mhm.
sector. So, of course, over time, AI might replace, or what, robots or something, I don't know, replace farmers.
Yeah.
We've seen even in Cork here, I did see some cool videos of these was it tractors that were going around with them. They were kind of solar powered and AI, whatever. They were
Yeah,
automated. So we might see that, but I don't know. That's an over time thing. We'll just replace farming jobs with AI and tech jobs, and there will be other ways of the economy. Maybe the 4-day work week, for example, will generate more jobs in in those other kind of industries, like you know, in sports or in
yeah.
leisure or catering or something like that. I think we'll always be able to shift that, but it's not even about the jobs, it is about the value. If we're creating billionaires, and if the wealth of our planet, if the wealth of our regions and of our continents and countries is being captured by a handful of people, that's not good for all of us. I mean, the other day I saw in the results of the election, Donald Trump elected in America, one of the headlines noted that the 10 richest people in America, their wealth each had jumped by a couple of billion, 2 or 3 billion each. The Elon Musks and Bill Gateses. So even the billionaires that didn't support Trump,
Yeah.
their wealth jumped. That's crazy. I the billionaire thing, I don't subscribe to. Nobody needs to be a billionaire. I don't see it as a democrat. We need to tax the rich. We need to tax the super rich, and we need to tax the corporations at a
Yeah.
higher rate. That's tax it for the environment and for workers to balance things out. In some shape or form, that has to come along, and there's nothing socialist or lefty about that. That's just common bloody sense.
We're talking about hundreds of billions to one person. Yeah, it's huge numbers. I'm curious about what PMIA's mission is going in the next future. So, as the CEO of Proudly Made in Africa, like how do you envision the organization really expanding the impacts, of connecting African producers to that international market access? Because they are still lacking on that on a huge scale.
I see. Listen, we've kind of, as an organization, we're still a very small organization. I think what we do best and we have the biggest impact on is in education. So you will always have connections to companies and entrepreneurs and activists and academics on the continent, back in Africa. But our goal here is, in Ireland, there's 250,000 third level students. As an organization, we would love to increase our at the moment, we've focused on the 50,000 students that study business or law. We want to get into those lecture theatres, get in front of those students, and change their mindsets around Africa, bring in African voices to change their perceptions. So what we've done recently is we're increasing our panel of lecturers, our panel of Proudly Made in Africa fellows, and we hope to bring more African experts and voices into more colleges and more classrooms. And then with the podcast series, obviously, each year we physically we stand in front of 5,000 third level business students. With the podcast, maybe we can increase that reach tenfold. To me, that would be success for us in Proudly Made in Africa, that we're getting to move from physically connecting with 5,000 students to maybe physically connecting with 10 or 20,000 students, but digitally collecting with 250,000. I mean, that would be the goal, embed Africa, the true voices and perspectives and situation in Africa, embed that in all third level courses. So that so really what we're in the business of is planting seeds. So the way I see that is that in the next 10 or 20 years, when those students move on, that they have a different mindset and a different attitude towards Africa, towards doing business responsibly in and with the people and the communities in the continent of Africa. That's really the focus for Proudly Made in Africa.
Okay, and how do you see these efforts evolving? Do you see it going beyond Ireland?
No, I think for now, if we can just reach those, that's kind of our real define our. We're so tiny. I mean, we're about
Mhm.
2 people. We're now with a couple of these new scholars, maybe 6 of us in
Okay.
part-time capacity. The digital, this podcast, obviously it can be listed anywhere, but
Yeah.
our metrics that we want to grade ourselves against is that, our sights are definitely set on those 250,000 third level students, the lecturers behind them, and the colleges that they attend. So even at the moment, there's about 40 third level colleges. We are connected in well over half of them, but we really are dedicated to about the top nine business schools in Ireland.
Okay.
Even to get like, look, even that 40 or 50,000 students that study business, if we were able to reach all of those, that target, I'd be very happy with that. So
Okay.
I think we got to tighten our focus and see, and then try to deliver more richer content and bring more African voices and experiences into that community.
And so far, though, with PMI, what's are the real challenges that you think you've seen with this efforts that you're taking on?
I mean, the challenge for NGOs and within third level education, funding is always a challenge. Sponsorship or corporate partnerships, that's it. The funding is what pays us to hire the lecturers and hire the academics and do research and spend time connecting with, do field trips or spend time connecting with companies and academics in Africa. So funding is always our biggest challenge, but I guess every NGO is dealing with that. Um, I mean, the students and the lecturers really enjoy. We have great experience with them. They love the content because the area that we're working in, coming in to talk about Africa, it's exciting. It's you're bringing in fresh material, and the students love that. It really connects with our beneficiaries,
Mm,
So, but I guess funding is our big challenge,
okay. Because there's also this aspect of, yeah, on one side you're educating students and that industry. I'm just curious if there is the possibility of, going directly to the corporations, so having like hosted events where they can be invited to speak, or you guys educate them more on, because they are also currently in action with these corporations at the moment.
I mean, look, I suppose maybe to re-answer the previous question, if we were
Mm,
to grow, we would love to bring our mission and our knowledge into business circles. So
okay.
yeah, we'd love to be getting into the chambers and into the small firms association and into networks of tech companies, and because not just we don't want to just influence the future generation of business leaders. It would be great to have conversations with the existing with today's business leaders and make
Yep.
them help change their attitudes around Africa and its people and its resources. So certainly would love to be doing that. But that again, that's down to the funding, and we just have to be realistic. Like we got to walk before we can run on this. So
Absolutely. I do agree with you. You've also made the idea of making sustainable business practices profitable, right? So far, what are the necessary steps you think these companies, if you have to articulate basically what we've discussed and something that maybe we haven't touched on, what are the necessary steps for more companies, to help them change their mindset, especially in Africa as well?
I think we need more African entrepreneurs. We need more African owned businesses getting access to European markets. Totally need that. But even there, we need the entrepreneurs to design their businesses that they are sharing the profits fairly, that they are sharing profits with farmers and investing profits into the environment. So we need a blueprint of shared value, that whether a company is based in the US, based in Europe, or based in Africa, it should have baked into its DNA from day one is we allocate X percentage of profit for the environment, X percentage for the farmers and workers. I think that formula, I mean, the principles of donut economics, the principles of the B Corp. I love the statement from the B Corp community. There's a definition of business. The role of a business in society is to find profitable solutions to the problems people and our planet face. I think that's a great statement. Um, I think that needs to be embedded in all of our businesses. Those in Africa, those here, those in the States, very much so.
And if you were to sum up your whole vision of, you know, the future of Africa in the next decade or two, what would you imagine for Africa?
I think I would love to see Africa as being a tourist destination where more, for folks in Ireland or in Europe, it's a place that we go to because it's beautiful, it's exciting, it's got amazing people, the food and the landscape is beautiful. So that's what I would envisage from, sitting here. For the people on the continent itself, I would love to see it embracing a new form of capitalism, that learning from the mistakes that we've made in Europe and in Asia and in America, the kind of exploitation of workers, the exploitation of the land, and that we see. I mean, Africa is leading the charge in terms of mobile payments, like M-Pesa over in Kenya. I'd like
Yeah.
to see more firsts taking place, more really, I suppose, in some ways, seeing it as the blank canvas, but certainly going, this is what works in Africa, to come up with a model that is sustainable, that creates jobs locally, good paying jobs, that create, that keeps supports communities and families locally, but that supports the habitats and a sustainable development in those farming areas. I would love to see Africa become the blueprint of what sustainable agriculture and habitat protection should be in should be when you want a population to thrive.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You spoke about the importance of dialing in and focusing, like what PMI is doing. Even though you might be ambitious, but you want to really make an impact. So it to me, I just saw that as priority. You see, this is the most critical aspect that needs to. It will lead to greater impact. So I wanted to just say there has been. It's been mentioned by some owners of coffee in Africa that the current supply chain requires them to export their coffee as raw commodities, and they don't have the opportunities to export finished products to the European market or the US market, for instance. And this has been strategically created for them to depend on that, because if you control the supply chain, the logistics of exportation, then you capture more of the value, and that's what's happening at the moment. So I've heard some of the CEOs mention that their challenge right now, or their focus, is building a culture of consumption within Africa itself, because Africa currently lacks the culture of coffee consumption. So I'm saying, do you agree with that notion? Like, is that the most pressing need right now?
No, I don't think it is the most pressing need. I mean, I get it. Every time you go to countries in Africa that grow coffee, it is surprising that you can't get a good cup of coffee locally, or that there isn't the buzz that you see here. That is changing. Kenya, Uganda, I've met loads of baristas in, like, really passionate, and there is lots of roasteries in Ethiopia and in Kenya. We do need more roasteries in the belt, and but to be serving local markets. So definitely African coffee communities and coffee growing countries should be cultivating a coffee culture locally. That's important. But look, if you're selling coffee from Kenya into Ireland, you really need to know Irish consumers. If I'm selling a fashion brand or fashion from Ireland into France, I need to know the French consumers. So you're never going to be able to replace that local knowledge of where the consumers are. But definitely within the coffee belt, there a coffee culture should be cultivated, a local coffee culture, because that knowledge will add and enrich the industry locally. But I see a more pressing issue is the first mile. I think, and I recently did 3 or 4 workshops. I connected in with 40 different coffee cooperatives from Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, and all of them, I think, the same issues. They're all doing some great work, but the same issues. That first mile, I think the coffee cooperatives need to have full transparency on their first mile. They need to have the data. They need to be generating the stories, capturing the data, proving that our coffee is organically grown, is the way in which our farmers or our cooperative works, is we protect the land. We've got a project where we're reforesting. We're using responsible agricultural methodologies, that we're not polluting rivers, that we're protecting the rivers and the edge of the fields, that we're composting and mulching, that we're pruning, that we're educating our farmers. I think the more that those local coffee cooperatives do, in my mind, that's the priority. Because if you can do that and really have that process super professional, and be able to put your hands on that data and have film and digital, capture the data, then you can bring that to buyers. And whether it's your own brand or some international buyer, the fact that they can prove that first mile, it's good for people, it's good for women's rights, it's good in terms of children at school, not in terms of child labor, and it's good for the environment in terms of trees not being chopped down, chemicals not being polluting the land. Knowing that and being able to prove that and always have that at hand at any point in time to be able to show that to any buyer or any consumer anywhere, that in my mind is the most powerful. If take Uganda, imagine if like one country in the coffee belt, if one country decided we are going to be the best of the best, the most organic, the most environmentally friendly coffee coming out of Africa, they could create a brand for themselves, a local brand that says, this is the highest standard. This is the gold standard on the continent of how coffee should be grown for the 21st century to protect the environment. And that's why our price is twice of what everybody else's price is. You could create your brand value. You know, brand value is almost created by values, the values that you represent, the values that you live and breathe. That's what a brand is. It's not a shiny package. It's not a logo or a celebrity endorsement. It's who you are. It's like the integrity of a human being. And you can do that at every step in the value chain, not just at the supermarket shelf. That piece for farmers is the most important thing that coffee cooperatives need to do. Now, of course, when you take it from the farm or Mount Elgon to Kampala, when you take it from the mountains into the capital cities across Africa, we do need a coffee culture. We do need baristas and flat whites and espressos and all. You know, we need cool machines and we need cafes and, you know, cool coffee people who are mixologists or whatever, you know, baristas who are really, and roasters who are trying different stuff out. We definitely need that because, and we're seeing it, there's a middle class rising up across the continent. Like middle class people everywhere, they're going to be on Netflix. They're going to be demanding their oat milk lattes and their, you know, their pastries in the morning. That will happen. And local markets, for many, I think many producers look at the local market, forget Europe, it's so far away. You know, there is opportunity locally as well, of course. It's probably it's probably both export and local. But that
Oh,
first mile piece to me
yeah.
is the focus.
You actually really just inspired something even in me. So I just want to say thank you for that. Many people might not really, I think you have to re-listen to that again because what I got from that was by them telling their story so originally, you know, and that just creates a brand for them, which can even inspire these third party brand vendors like corporations to own the producers on their marketing. You know, where they start to say, our products are sourced from so and so producers. This stand out because it helps them in their selling of those products as well. Yeah, actually, that's
I mean,
beautiful.
look, you know, if you think of it with Manuka honey from New Zealand, right? Or is
Yes,
it Blue Mountain is the coffee from Jamaica? That
yes,
costs crazy price for that.
yes,
So you know, when you have Wicklow lamb here in Ireland, you go to a French restaurant, you go to France, and you'll see on the menu they will say Wicklow
yes,
lamb. You know,
yes,
so it
yes.
is possible for coffee, and I think one country, it could be Rwanda, because on certain things they really seem to be charging ahead. One
Mm,
country in Africa is going to say, you know what, they're going to get together and maybe they're small enough like Rwanda, and they go, we are going to be the leaders, the most organic, the most ecological, the most like a Costa Rica, you know, but in
mm,
Africa. Whoever does that will create a brand for their country and for their coffee.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. That would be
And that
beautiful to
prize is
see.
there. It needs one African country or, you know, group of producers to collaborate and go and step up and say, this is our mission. You know, Kenya could do it, Uganda could do it, Rwanda could do it. They just need to, it does require collaboration.
Well, I'm hoping to see this, you know, in my lifetime, because yeah, it's a beautiful future as long as we, you know, we're not staying ignorant. We're choosing to seek knowledge and even dive deeper. So I do hope that this discussion helps some people, you know, go and look further into some of these topics. Like you mentioned, Oxfam's article on Ripe for Change. I had a brief reading about that and was, you know, it's in depth. They really captured a lot of information that were helpful. So I'll try and add more information about this even on the links, how people can learn more about Moyee Coffee, proudly made in Africa as well. Because I'm pretty sure a lot of people will find this conversation interesting and want to dive deeper into that. Well, I just want to first say it's been an absolute pleasure just having this conversation, and thank you for even having the time to join on this session. So thank you again, Killian.
It's been a delight to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Awesome.